Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition, and we are so grateful that you're here. And over these next 2 hours, we are going to be covering quite a number of different issues. Jeremy Dyson in studio with us, and he is the Special Counsel for Litigation and Communications at First Liberty. We're going to talk about a couple of cases, one going to the Supreme Court, another one that was recently filed in a lower court. We're going to give you an update on that. Obviously, we're going to spend some time talking about the press conference by the president and kind of looking back over 1 year of the Biden presidency. And we also have in studio with us Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar for the Institute for Policy Innovation. You will see that we have posted 3 of his commentaries, so that's going to take a while as well. And in between that, we'll get into a couple of other topics, not the least of which is to at least acknowledge, and we'll say more about that next week, that we are coming up again on the anniversary of that decision known as Roe versus Wade and what that might mean in the future. So we have lots to cover, and certainly I appreciate both of you being here. But Jeremy, I'm going to let you make the announcement, even though I've seen it, and I suspect some of our listeners may know. We have not talked about what is the current status of Coach Kennedy in that case.
Coach Kennedy is on his way to the final play, which is at the Supreme Court of the United States. Last Friday, right after the show, actually, as a matter of fact, I think, the court granted our request to have that case heard. This is the second time we've asked them for this, and they have now granted his petition. And so we're like, it's a madhouse at the office right now, because we've got a briefing schedule that is due before the end of February. That probably puts us in argument sometime in April, towards the end of April, more than likely, which means by June we'll have a decision as to whether or not you can fire a coach or really any staff member at a public high school for engaged in what the Bremerton High School called demonstrative religious activity. In this case, it was a 15-second silent prayer by himself. That was it. And so that's where things are going right now. And so we're going hard and fast after this right now.
And again, I think some of us thought, well, that'd just come up in the fall. And here you are, pedal to the metal. Yeah. Dr. Merrill Matthews, sometimes when we're writing articles, that's one thing. Writing briefs for the Supreme Court, I think that would be sort of a very significant challenge, wouldn't it?
And this is kind of the equivalent of First Liberty Super Bowl, I think. Yeah. I mean, you finally got in the big show with this.
That's right. And
we'll get a decision on that. Of course, then we may get abortion decision coming up at the end of the term as well. So it could be a very interesting June coming up.
Well, and let's mention you also have one out of the state of Maine. So it turns like So again, these are all very important cases, and a lot of them are First Liberty cases.
Yeah, and Kennedy's case is going to be very important. It's such a wide-ranging application here. I was talking to a reporter about this, and they're trying to kind of grasp the scope of it. I said, look, this is not just every football coach that's out there. The way that this wording is written, let me kind of go back over the facts. It's been 6 years since this happened, 6+ years now since this has happened. Coach Kennedy, remember, he made a promise to God to if he's going to be a coach, that he would go to the 50-yard line, take a knee and pray, thanking God for the game, for the players, and all that. And so that's what he did. And this went on unchallenged and uncomplained about for 7 years. 7 years this went on with no problem. Then someone had the audacity to compliment the practice. And what had kind of happened during that time is things had morphed, because kids came up to me like, "Hey, coach, what are you doing? You're, why are you taking a knee?" And he's like, "Well, I'm praying." "Well, can we join you?" He's like, "It's a free country, do what you want to do." And so on their own volition, they chose to join him on all this. And that kind of turned into this like post-game kind of speech thing that he did. And so the school district found out about this and like, we got to figure out if this is right. And they said, look, you can't do the before-game prayer in the locker room, and you can't do that post-game like religious speech after the game kind of thing. And he's like, "Oh, okay, cool. I understand that. These are your rules. It's your place. Totally understand it. All I want to do is pray and take a knee at the 50-yard line." They're like, "Okay, fine, that's fine." And then when he did it, they came back and said, "Oh, wait. You can't do that either. You can't take that knee in silent prayer. Oh, you can if you want to go up to the press box or go into a closet somewhere inside the school. You can do that." And there's even a time in there where coach decided not to do it, drove away from the game. Was like, oh my goodness, I just violated the promise that I made to God. And he turns the car around, goes back, waits for everybody to leave the stadium, and then took his knee in 15 seconds worth of prayer and went back home. But I mean, he's like, look, I'm not going to go under the bleachers to do this. I'm not going to go up to the press box to do this. I made a commitment to God to do one thing in my life, and that's it. Like coach would tell you that he's just an average Joe, and frankly, I'll tell you, he's not a very good Christian even, right? Like he just made one commitment, and that was to take a knee in silent prayer at the 50-yard line after these games, and he intends to keep that promise. And because he did that, and he's like, look, I'm not going to go hide somewhere and keep this away from things. That's the reason why the school district suspended him. And 2 days after he did it, they suspended him, and then they didn't renew his contract for the following year. So they fired him because he took 15 to 30 seconds engaged in what the school again called demonstrative religious activity, meaning we know what you're doing, and you're not looking for a contact lens or tying your shoe. We know you're praying. And because the students can see you, they could think that this is somehow an endorsement of religion by the state of Washington, which is frankly ridiculous and quite silly. And so he's fired. So what else does that mean? I told you this is wide implications. Well, we got coaches all over the country that either pray or their students might pray. And what happens if they're too close to that huddle when they're praying? Do they have to like plug their ears and run away? La 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 la! I can't hear you. No, that'd be a different kind of discrimination. That they can't do that either. But that doesn't apply just to the gridiron. I mean, if a teacher bows her head over her salad in the cafeteria, well, that's demonstrative religious activity in sight of these students that she could be terminated for on the spot. You want to talk about absurd, but this would be true if the student is walking down the hallway and sneezes and the teacher says, "God bless you." That's demonstrative religious activity for which you could be terminated under these rules by Bremerton High School. That is far from the Constitution and the First Amendment's promise to preserve and protect religious liberty, as the Supreme Court even said themselves back in Tinker v. Des Moines, that famous case. Neither students nor teachers shed their constitutional rights when they walk through the schoolhouse gates. Bremerton has said, oh, yeah, you do. You shed them when you go through not only the schoolhouse gates, but onto the gridiron.
So again, that first article is Coach Kennedy's case. You can find out more about that. You can listen to that. You can see an interview, all sorts of other resources. And so that is one that I would encourage you to pray about. Just before we take a break, a lot of people have wondered, where are we at the moment with the Navy SEALs? Because that's another case you've been following.
Just before I left the office, we got an email from the filing system. I'm so sorry, that said that the state of the United States Department of Justice is going to appeal that decision. So you'll remember that we won a preliminary injunction back at the beginning of January, and we've been waiting to see what the DOJ is going to do. They've finally settled on the course of action, which is to continue to fight this and to appeal this to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal. So we're all in for the SEALs. We're going to defend them wherever we can and as long as we have to.
Well, again, I would encourage you to pray for First Liberty, and we've got that first article there, but you can scroll around as you're there and find out a little bit more. And also, I think you had a very good FirstLibertyLive.com interview yesterday with Mike Berry, so that's a great resource as well. Let's take a break, and we'll clear our throats, get our coughs out of the way, and we'll come back. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, I want to get your thoughts, because we had a press conference the other day with the president, and it was
Is that what you call it?
Yeah, well, it was almost 2 hours. So if your bar was he was able to stand there for almost 2 hours and answer questions, well, he passed that low bar. But I want to get your thoughts about what he said and the fact that even, I think, Van Jones called it foggy and meandering. So when your friends are saying that, you recognize we have maybe some things to talk about, which we will do right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Lots of controversial ideas are being proposed right now, and I know you probably wonder how to respond to them. Eliminate the Electoral College, regulate campaign speech, and end the filibuster are just a few. The best way to respond to many of these proposals is to remind Americans that our country is a republic, not a democracy. The framers recognized that the country would be quite diverse. They wanted to create a government that would allow different viewpoints to get a hearing. They didn't want the president merely to be elected by the larger populations in the cities like Boston and New York. That is why we have an electoral college. States with smaller populations feared that states with large populations would always elect their candidate. The electoral college forces candidates to campaign in the entire country, not just in population areas. That also explains why we have the House of Representatives elected by voters every 2 years. But regardless of its size, each state gets 2 U.S. senators who are selected by state legislatures every 6 years, but now are also elected by the popular vote. We have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution to protect Americans, especially minorities, from a democracy where the majority could take away the fundamental rights from a minority. We enjoy freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to bear arms, and freedom from unlawful search and seizure. Even the idea of a filibuster in the U.S. Senate was implemented so that the majority would be forced to hear the arguments from the minority before passing important legislation. The filibuster may have been abused, but the concept once again illustrates our constitutional order. Sadly, many of these controversial ideas are being proposed by politicians who went to law school and should know better. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Dr. Merrill Matthews and Jeremy Dice. And Dr. Matthews, let me just for a few minutes look at that press conference. First of all, 2 hours, maybe the longest press conference ever. And I'll give credit where credit is due. If you stand in front of a group and try to answer questions for a long period of time, an hour seems like 2 hours, and 2 hours probably seems like half a day. So I'll give credit there. But then when, in the midst of this, the president said that he was convinced that he outperformed expectations, I see a smile on your face.
Well, expectations were not high, so outperforming that was not hard. He certainly was able to stand longer than I thought he'd be able to, but signs of a good knees does not the same as signs of a good mind.
Yes.
And when I would listen to a good chunk of it. I mean, it was 2 hours, so I couldn't devote the whole time to it. But some of the things that he came up with as during the incursion into Ukraine and the
minor incursion, yes.
A minor incursion
from the Green Men
might be okay, it sounded like.
Yes.
And you have if the questions about the coming election and the voting rights bill, and if they don't pass this, then the next election is liable to be, not fair, not safe, not illegitimate or something. It kind of went on, and you know that the media people out there felt like they were getting what in Washington they call a gaffe. That's when somebody inadvertently tells the truth. And so it was very interesting. But part of the reason why they did this is, number one, he hadn't had many press conferences.
That's
and
right.
Number two, to try to show that he's still on his game. And all you showed he can stand there for 2 hours, because it was terrible. I listened to National Public Radio shortly afterwards, and they are very friendly to Biden, much more so than they were to Donald Trump. And even there, the various reporters and analysts that were on there, they were giving it a bit of a hard time. They don't think he did a very good job. And the only person I've seen who thought he did a good job was Jen Psaki and James Carville. It's looking worse and worse for the president right now, just in his ability to be able to go the next 3 years.
I do want to get into, obviously, some of the substance because we talk about elections, Ukraine, and all that. But I thought I'd at least come to Jeremy and get any comments about style and anything else that you maybe reflected on in terms of the press conference.
Well, truthfully, I did, more productive things, which is literally anything other than watching a 2-hour press conference of the President of the United States, or at least this one. And so I'm truthfully not well spoken about this whole thing. I did see some of the coverage of it all, and I think from now on, by the way, when you ask me a question, I'm as we're going off air, I'm going to be saying, "Well, that's a stupid question," and just it seems to be that's the thing to do nowadays. Yeah. So we'll see what happens.
Yes. By the way, if you haven't seen that was something that was caught on tape. You know, one thing you learn around this table: the microphones are always on, and somehow the president didn't know that. I know, Dr. Merrill Matthews, we are going to get to all of your columns later, but you have one that's in the works on the issue of elections, and it's seems to me that Jen Psaki had to come back and say, maybe when he said it's illegitimate, it's not the case. Because the other day, it was either National Review or Wall Street Journal said, what's worse than having a president question the elections? Let's have 2 presidents question the election. So I want to say to our younger listeners, there was a time in 1960 when Richard Nixon really had questions about whether or not there was some electoral malfeasance in Cook County, Illinois, but said, nevertheless, we'll go on. You could go to Gerald Ford in 1976. There was a question about a couple of close races there with Jimmy Carter, but again, we're going to move on.
You can go back to Lyndon Johnson in his first race.
Yes, you can.
Where Duval
Coke
County
Stevens.
in Texas was.
Yeah.
It was just how many votes do you need?
And one precinct voted in perfect alphabetical order, which I thought was interesting. But then by the time you got to 2000, Al Gore questioned the election. Certainly in 2016, Hillary Clinton questioned the election. And of course, now Donald Trump in 2020. Well, Joe Biden.
Don't forget Stacey Abrams in the gubernatorial election in Georgia.
But now he's doing something else. He's questioning the election before it happens.
Pre-questioning the election.
And this is something that I want our listeners to know didn't always take place.
No.
And yet this is now where it's almost saying, well, we are sure we're going to lose in the midterm, so we'll just say we have real questions about the legitimacy.
And just to build on that, remember in Donald Trump's first run for the White House, when he was going against Hillary Clinton, one of the debates, somebody asked them, will you accept the results of the election? And Trump was kind of like, we'll wait and see what happens on the election. And he got hammered by the media.
Don't you know?
Oh, he just got hammered. And Hillary Clinton came and challenged him. Nobody's ever questioned the election. Well, she's questioned it ever since. But it's amazing the flip-flops that you see, and the press only will report negatively on the Republicans, typically on this, but I haven't, other than sort of raising some questions, I haven't heard them giving Biden a very hard time on this.
So I don't understand this then, because we've been told for the last year that last year's election was the most legitimate that has ever occurred, probably in the history of mankind. I mean, this is what the left has said in response to Donald Trump saying it was an illegitimate election, that there was the more people voted than ever. It was a free and open election. That anyone dares to count it is a traitor to the country. I mean, they've used some really strong language. So now we're saying that it's not legitimate, and we need to pass major legislation and kill the filibuster in order to do that, because our elections are so... which one is it? I can't keep up on this.
Well, of course, what Jen Psaki said was that she's focusing on the legislation that various states, red states, are looking at passing to try to change things. And to the extent, there may be some that are a little over the top in that, but to the extent I've seen them, they're saying, well, we had several different areas where the polls were open at different times. Let's unify those.
Right.
We may have some areas, some precincts where nobody was going and voting, and so maybe we'll close those and we'll centralize them here, and maybe have fewer ones. Especially in a time of COVID, you may not be able to get as many volunteers to go there and work the elections and so forth. So I've just seen the elections. I thought the elections went pretty well. There's always a few issues out there, but. I would expect in the next one it would go fairly well, unless we get this federalization of the election system.
I've also liked the other two. I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, Kirby, but I like the other two complaints. One, you have to have an ID in order to vote. Everybody's upset about that. But you also need to have an ID and a vaccine passport in order to go into most major cities and restaurants right now.
Which is it?
Which one is it then, right? Like I'm not sure how that works out. And
most blue cities, let's say, and the same cities that say you need to have an ID and a vaccine passport to get coming out of city, so you don't need either to be able to go in here and vote.
Right. And so then we have the issue of whether or not you get food or drink in the line. This one has bothered me, and so I'm going to get on a soapbox here for just a second because I have the microphone and I'm keeping everybody else's muted. No, have you ever gone to vote and been like, man, I've been here so long, I need something to eat. If only I had remembered to bring my lunchbox with me. I didn't realize I was going to be here between breakfast and lunch and miss my second breakfast this morning. I have never even gotten a little bit thirsty standing in line. Yeah. And look, I get the historic practices of people trying to bribe people with beer and liquor and all that kind of stuff. Fine, we can dispense with all that. That's easy. But don't come at me and say people are getting dehydrated in the voting lines and they're dying of starvation. Are you kidding? Come on. I want to know where these lines are that are so long that we have to have a buffet dinner before you go in line to vote. I mean, what is going on?
Well, and of course, most states, 40 states, I think now have early voting. So that's what I always do. I go down to early vote.
For sure.
I'll pick a time in the afternoon or early morning sometime when the crowds are down. I'll go and you walk right in. Even during the presidential election, I might have to wait behind one or two people. So do
you get hungry when you do that? I mean, do you bring a power bar?
No. And I think even in those cases, they said you had to be, if you're going to hand out water, you had to be a certain distance from 50 or 100 feet or something like that, so that you're not trying to talk to.
So it's like a mirage out there that you got people crawling to get through the sand of the Sahara to get to the water?
The only time I know of recently in the last 10, 12 years or so that there was a big issue was in Pennsylvania, I think, where Black Panthers were out there. Remember that? And walking around the clubs in military uniforms and so forth. And Democrats said, that's not a problem. What's the problem with that? It's okay to walk around the clubs in a military uniform.
They weren't handing out water.
The waiting line.
They weren't handing out ham sandwiches or something. I mean,
that's where it is. We are having a lot of fun at the expense of Joe Biden. When we come back, I do want to get into it real quickly, just in terms of the whole issue. Is this really Bull Connor and George Wallace and Jefferson Davis when you look at some of the laws that have been passed in Georgia and Texas? And then we'll get on to maybe 1 year of Joe Biden's presidency, because that's our second article. If you find yourself saying, I want to read all these articles, they are on the website today. I want to thank Andrew for putting them up there. And the first one is on Coach Kennedy, second one on Joe Biden, and then we have a number of commentaries we're going to get to. So we have a lot to cover. And let me just mention that our commentaries today are ones that you might want to learn a little bit more about. Kids' Vaccine Mandates by Penna Dexter. Also, my commentary today, it's a republic. That's a good answer for some of the questions we'll be talking about a little bit later. But let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and we're also kind of doing a year-in edition because this time last year you had the first day for President Joe Biden. So after 1 year, wanted to get some thoughts about that.
We finally made it.
Yeah. I had some people say it felt like 2 years, and maybe it only feels like 1 year to you, or 1 year of dog years. I don't know what it is. But anyway, Merrill Matthews, Jeremy Dyson here. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you because both in the press conference and then, of course, going to Atlanta, this argument that anybody that does not pass these, I think, draconian laws before the United States Senate. Both of them have passed the House in front of the Senate. Now, to do so, you'd have to get rid of the filibuster, and there are a few Democrats that said, yeah, I don't think I really want to get rid of the filibuster. But if indeed that is the case, it's almost like muddying the water and almost making a statement that indeed we will have an illegitimate election next November by all the statements that the president's been making. And I don't think that's going to be helpful for the Republic or even for the Democratic Party.
You know, it was strange, some of the things that he said. There was a point in the press conference where he said that Donald Trump is essentially the head of the party and that he controls things, and that some of the senators have come to him and said, I'd really like to vote for this, but I can't because I would be criticized and so forth. And then he said, I've been around here a long time, and we always used to be able to have somebody split from their party. That, you know, somebody said, I want to go this way, and you'd have one or two people. He said, now you've got one or two people who won't split from their party and vote with us. Then he turns around and criticizes Manchin and Sinema because they split from their party. You can't make some of this stuff up, and he doesn't catch the irony in that.
He probably stood in line too long and needed a sandwich. That's my guess.
Well, what's your thoughts about this year? Because in some respects, if I had told you this time last year, the kinds of issues, the withdrawal of Afghanistan, inflation, certainly we recognize COVID was raging back then. So he inherited some things that weren't good, maybe a little bit with the supply chain. But in almost every case, Jeremy, let me come to you. It seems like things have gone from bad to worse. You've certainly seen it. In this time 2 years ago, you were talking about how the administration under Donald Trump was much more sensitive to issues of religious liberty. It seems like every time we turn around, there's some place where you have to file another lawsuit because of something that this administration has done.
It has certainly given us job security in the last year to be able to, go against the administration on so many issues, and it's been hard to kind of pick your battles because there's so many and so many to come, repeatedly. But it seems like most presidencies that I recall, that after they become elected, they sort of have this turn to the center. In fact, that was the left's big turn, that you need a term. They needed to turn to the center as they began to govern. It's not just a matter of running for office. You've actually make the turn to lead. It seems to me that the president has failed to make that turn entirely. In fact, he's just completely ignored it. He's never gotten out of campaign mode. Except that he's changed most of his campaign tunes. So he's running the new campaign, and the campaign seems to be, how do I make this as bad as possible, right? How do I... The course correction for most every president is do something, and a lot of people don't like it, or maybe 30%, 40% don't like what you've just done. Let's go do something that 30 to 40% of people do like, and they'll go do that thing and kind of correct back in the direction. So you don't have a straight line, you have this kind of wavy line that occurs. That's not happened. Like, it's almost as if there's been an intentional effort to say, that was bad. Hey, how do we make it worse? Have we given any thought to, hey, I know, let's get out of Afghanistan. Oh, that's a great idea. That could make us even more unpopular. Oh, okay. Afghanistan. Hey, that worked out great. It was terrible. Nobody liked it. Okay, what do we do now? Vaccine mandate. Yeah. We'll make everybody in the country, including the military, get a COVID shot. Great idea. Tanks even further. I mean, what now? The election that we called legitimate last year, we should call it illegitimate and try to pass the filibuster. But wait a minute, didn't we say a couple years ago that we shouldn't have changed the filibuster? Don't we have like mountains of tape on that thing? Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. It'll make it even worse. That's how it seemed like that argument that discussion has been going on in some back room somewhere. Because otherwise, Merrill, it just doesn't make any sense.
And I would argue Joe Biden comes by this not turning to the middle legitimately, because Barack Obama never turned to the middle, even though he campaigned on the notion that you elect me, I'm going to be a uniter. It's not the red states of America, it's not the blue states, it's the United States of America, and so forth. And he didn't. He sort of said, if you don't agree with me, I've got a phone, I've got a pen, and I'm just going to go ahead and do what I want to anyway, as much as I can. And Joe Biden has come along with that. And I would argue, I think Joe Biden at this point has probably peaked in his presidency maybe in May or June, because Omicron cases were going down. The COVID cases, Omicron variant hadn't really ticked up. They were getting more people vaccinated. They weren't quite to where they wanted to be by the 1st of July, but they were moving along in that line. But then here comes Omicron. Here comes Afghanistan. Here comes his pressure to do these other things. It has been a disaster for the last 6 months, and everybody knows it, and including the administration, which is how you know that right after the press conference, he said, there's news stories out today, there's going to be a reset. And the reset is we're going to get Joe out to go visit around various places and talk to people and so forth, by which they mean that translates we're not having him do any more press conferences for a long time.
And so what had happened is they went back into the room after the press conference and said, okay, that was great. That got us down 2 more points. How do we get further? I know. Let's get the president and Kamala Harris. Let's get them out there meeting with people. That should put it into the 20s, right? I mean, it is almost as if that's been the intentional effort to see if they can get sub-zero in popularity on things.
Yes.
I think the other, and to forgive me for being so kind of satirical on all this, but going back to kind of make a serious point, I pick up on your point on the Obama administration. You're right. They never did correct either. They went
Right.
further left. He's just not nearly as adroit at doing that as his predecessor was, and so he can't really do that well. And furthermore, who's he a senator from? The state of Delaware, right? I mean, not exactly like high, rabid conservative Delaware, right? It's a pretty leftist state, at least center left. And frankly, it's a very small population, so he didn't have to appease a whole 330 million people. Now he somehow has to. So he's never had to make that course correction to the center or to the right.
Point.
He's always had
Never
to go to the left.
that.
And so now he's just left there going, well, being more charitable, I don't understand why I'm not getting more popular. Every time I go to the left, my points go down. Well, maybe stop going to the left.
And where's the course correction? That was one of the editorials that came out. Since you brought up Kamala Harris, and one of our first callers wants to talk about that. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The other day, of course, President Biden said that I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion, and then we end up having to fight about what to do and not to do, etc. The minor incursion was so much of a foreign policy gaffe because that's kind of the standard way the Russian military does a minor incursion. You had Kamala Harris come out and try to correct that one as well. So that's kind of an interesting
What did she say?
issue.
Now is the time, and that time now is the time to do the thing, always to time to do it. In the minor. No, I like the president of Ukraine went on Twitter. Did you see that comment?
Yeah.
He made? He said there is basically no such thing as a minor incursion, just like there's no such thing as a minor death. And there are no minor nations here, Mr. President.
Yes.
This is speaking as someone who's the head of a major nation, and just walked away.
Well, let's get some of the calls, because that's exactly what we have here, because Ukraine is kind of front and center. So first of all, go to Georgia, WLPE. Fran, thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate you taking the call. I'm going to try to say this politically correctly, but if we've been protecting someone who can't do his job for 2 years and suddenly we decide to not protect him anymore, and if his second in command doesn't want the job, does the third in command want to establish herself before the 2022 elections? And what would happen then?
One correction: it's only been 1 year. It's been 1 year.
I'm talking about the year he was campaigning and they hit him.
Right, yeah, we know. We're just having fun with you. But you're thinking, okay, if Kamala Harris doesn't exactly fill the role any better than Joe Biden, do we end up with Nancy Pelosi?
Nancy Pelosi's third. And that's why when people were saying, we think Trump is going to be reinstated at some point, they were talking last August, and I said, well, there's no provision, there's no constitutional provision for that. If you don't like Biden, then you kick him out. And but if you do that, if you get rid of him, then it goes to Kamala. And if you get rid of her, then it goes to Nancy Pelosi, and we're going the wrong way.
But again, that is kind of interesting that some people have said that as much as people feel like the president is not there mentally, and I don't think I'm saying anything that anybody would disagree with, what do you do when you go to Kamala Harris? And yet at the same time, there have been more and more people that are suggesting maybe he's old. I mean, the other day, Atlantic Magazine, we recognize maybe he's just too old. Did that just occur to you?
Well, look, I'm going to take a different perspective on that after the break here, because I'm actually going to defend the president on that point and make I hope is a pro-life point later on.
Yes, well, that'd be very good, because that is seemingly the drumbeat, and we got some more phone calls too. We'll get those. 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
The COVID-19 vaccine was approved for children 5 and older on an emergency basis at the end of October. Immediately, talk of mandates began. Several experts on an FDA advisory panel warned against mandating the shot for kids. But some leaders have already succumbed to what National Review's Rich Lowry calls the irresistible urge of officialdom in blue areas toward pandemic coercion. Once the FDA fully approves the vaccine for children, mandates in California, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. will take effect, and others are in the works. This is crazy. First, there's no evidence the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines prevent infection and transmission of the Omicron variant, which represents over 95% of cases. In a piece for the Wall Street Journal, Nobel Prize winner for physiology, Dr. Luc Montagnier, cites research from Denmark and Canada showing that vaccinated people have higher rates of Omicron infection than unvaccinated people. Secondly, COVID is mild in children. The Omicron variant is even more so. Anecdotally, I tested positive after having all my kids and grandkids over for Christmas. Merry Christmas. I gave it to a few of them. The 2 little ones who tested positive had low fevers and mild coughs for a day or so. Rich Lowry points out COVID vaccinations aren't going to eliminate COVID the way, say, Jonas Salk's miraculous innovation eliminated polio. In fact, he writes, it's not even clear that childhood vaccinations will do much to dent the spread. Unvaccinated kids are unlikely to get seriously ill from COVID, but the vaccine poses a risk to boys, even boys aged 5 to 11, of a heart condition called myocarditis. In Los Angeles, the school board attempted to mandate that students 12 and older be vaccinated or relegated to remote learning, causing what Mr. Lowry calls an almost guaranteed harm, kneecapping their education. Parents can weigh these considerations and decide whether getting their teens and now their little kids vaccinated is worth the risk. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to another call in just a minute. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Jeremy Dyson. Jeremy, you wanted to defend old people. I appreciate that since I'm the old guy around the table here. Some of these ageist comments, but it is interesting that the Atlantic Magazine didn't say the president is not mentally up to the job. They said, well, we just discovered he's old. As if old means you can't actually serve in office.
Yeah, no. Look, the Christian worldview would hold, especially our elders, in a high regard, and we, especially those younger, are to hold to that very affirmatively, because we know that wisdom is gained through a righteous life. My grandfather this October turned 100 years old, and there isn't a more wise man on the planet in my estimation, nor is there a kinder man. It's kind of hard sometimes for me to understand I actually came from his lineage because he's both kind and wise. But, it's amazing that we can find these things that, Proverbs tells us that the gray hair is the crown of the aged is gained through a righteous life, and that is gained over time in there. So you go through Proverbs over and over again, you see that. And so I like to immediately dismiss the discussion about ageism, because it's not just because someone is old that makes them ineligible, nor is it something that they're young that makes them ineligible. We do tend to be young and foolish, and so there's a prudential quality about being young and doing stupid things. I think all of us can understand that, who have now put on some years and some distance between their youthful indiscretions and other things. But I also think it's just way too easy and too much of a pass to say, well, he's old and therefore disqualified. Now, if there are some serious medical issues going on that do come with age, then we need to be aware of those things. And if to the extent that the administration is hiding that from the American people, they're doing a disservice both to him and to the country, and they should be ashamed of themselves. But absent that showing, and we don't have that to say that here's the data on that, so let's discard that. It's too easy to just dismiss him as a bumbling fool, because it's very easy for him to portray himself in that way. And so I don't wish us to make the argument on the point of him being old and therefore, he should be removed from office because he's too old to do it all. No, he should be discredited for the work that he's doing precisely because of the work that he's doing. And it's bad. And it's bad enough for us to be able to point to it and say, look how stupid this is. That's easy enough, right? To say this is right and wrong. This is very, very wrong. We can commend him for where he happens to stumble upon a good idea on occasion, which nothing comes to my mind right now, but that must be out there somewhere. But we can also legitimately criticize as being bad governing and bad leadership and bad for the country the decisions that he and his team is making right now, because that is exactly what's going on. So it's an easy argument to kind of laugh about this old tottering fool out there. But I don't think that is fair for us to do so. And nor do I mean to suggest either of you think that would be true. I certainly don't do that. But it's a good corrective for all of us to remember we can make the argument without making the ad hominem argument. That's exactly what the other side does. It is not what conservatives, and certainly not what conservative Christians ought to be doing.
And speaking of the other side, do you remember how when Donald Trump was made president, various psychiatrists and psychologists came out and said, I believe he has mental health issues, and we're not sure he's cognitively safe or stable or things of that nature. And then you had some of the people in the profession come out. So you never actually gone and examined him like a medical professional is supposed to do. You're just sort of going off some of the things he's saying. But it's interesting. You heard that with Donald Trump. I don't hear that now. No. I don't think it's because the left have become more sensitive to those things. No. But
no, and it's good for us to recall the great quip by Ronald Reagan, right? I'm not going to use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. And I think that line rung so well in the political electorate. It did. Because of this reverence we do have and should have for people of age, right? I grew up, my dad ran a retirement community, and it was a religious one. I now sit on the board of that community down in Florida. In fact, I have a board meeting next week there. And it's a remarkable place because of the incredible people that I met there. I mean, I met two men who discovered in retirement that they crossed the Remagen Bridge, like past each other on the bridge. They said, I was going this way that day and I was going that way that day. I mean, these are incredible guys. Was an attaché to Omar Bradley, and talk about the history that I got to witness from the people who literally gave birth in a Philippine prisoner of war camp because they were missionaries in the Philippines and refused to leave the people there that they were ministering to during World War II. The paratroopers came in and saved them right before they were going to be shot. I mean, these are incredible things, and not just the experiences that they have, but men and women who have pioneered missions and have pioneered various things in life, grown huge organizations everywhere from, a CEO for GE that lived there that I got to know very well and very deeply, to people who ran churches were pastors and very faithful in their service over time. So I just have a great dear love for that. There was a guy the guy who founded Piper Airways, the Piper Cub plane, right, that has served in many mission fields because of that plane. He was a resident there. I got to meet him. He had Alzheimer's, and so he was never in his right mind. But his wife daily met with him. I mean, every day. There was a president of a denomination that lived there, and it was he had Alzheimer's and just didn't remember anything. But if he ever got agitated, they would just say, hey, would you go pray for so-and-so? And he would stop immediately and go and kneel beside that person and pray for that person. every day at lunch he would ask his wife to marry him again. Bub, I love you. Let's get married. Let's, that kind of, those examples to me as a 15-year-old kid cleaning the air vents in there or changing the linens. I mean, that was a huge influence on my life, and it should be for all of our lives. I wish we had that kind of an example being set in the White House. I don't see that right now. But it's not because he's just old. It's because his character is lacking.
Yes. Great stories. Great stories. Let's take at least another phone call here, and then we'll get into some of the other pieces that we have posted. Doc, I think you want to talk about Kamala Harris, and we've talked about her, so it's on the table.
Well, sure. First of all, I'm a comedian, and I do a lot of flying and driving, and I noticed there's a lot of Trump flags still, and I don't see any Joe Biden flags, so I'm confused. I thought this guy's supposed to have won, and there's no Joe Biden flags anywhere. It's just, now, the thing is, most people, America need to know that black people, the black culture, we look at Kamala Harris like Stacey Abrams look at Joe Biden. It's like, no. She talks down to people. She talks down to people, and she stays to a script. She's not thinking. She's trying to remember the script and staying to the script. This administration is so bad that black Democrats were saying, Doc, you're right. My bad. I'm like, hey, don't blame me. I voted for Trump, But one lady tried to ask me, so you really think Trump lost and Joe Biden didn't win? And I said one thing, and it hit her like a brick. I said, you think you think President Nimrod got more votes than Barack Obama? And I showed her a picture when Nimrod was campaigning and he had like 9 people. You saying this guy got more votes than Barack Obama? She's a Democrat, and it hit her like a wall. Like, they know that Nimrod didn't get more votes than Barack Obama. And I call him Nimrod because he's the king of Babylon.
Yeah. But again, I get the point, and that is, if indeed we end up with a President Kamala Harris, I've had a lot of people, even those that originally supported her, saying, gosh, she just doesn't seem real. And there is always the ability of certain individuals to connect. Certainly Ronald Reagan had that. Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton, for that matter, had that.
And Barack Obama.
And Barack Obama giving a speech, sometimes one-on-one, some not so much, but they just don't come away saying, oh boy, I feel like she's really on our team.
Yeah, I think America wants I'm sorry for all the Baptists who are going to hear this, but America wants a president they can go and have a beer with.
Yeah,
right.
Of course.
I don't think anybody would
likability factor.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'd have a good time. I don't drink beer, but I'd have a good time having coffee with Joe Biden, because I think he'd be an interesting person to be around. I would not enjoy my time with Kamala Harris. It just because the laugh and the fake smile would be so off-putting to me.
I would think so.
I hate to be so shallow on my criticism, especially after what I just said in this previous segment, but it's off-putting.
Yeah, and I think Doc's got a point there. And again, he's talking with some of the African-American friends and listeners there. We have to take a break, but when we come back, a couple of very good articles, one of which is, I think, very relevant. Dr. Merrill Matthews saying maybe not a red wave election, maybe a red tsunami. That gets back to the popularity or lack thereof of the president and the Democratic Party. We'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is Weekend Edition. We're so privileged to have these two individuals here. If you'd like to know a little bit more about First Liberty, you can go to firstliberty.org. And we're going to be now pulling some of the columns by Dr. Merrill Matthews, IPI.org. And you might be thinking, if you're in different parts of the country, well, why are you talking about the election? That's so far off. Well, for those of us around the table, actually 3 weeks from Monday, we could actually start early voting, because the election, the primary election in the state of Texas, is March 1st. For the rest of you in the various parts of the country, it's way off.
It's way off.
In Alaska, the primary is August 16th. In Arizona, it's August 2nd. California is June 7th. Also, that's when North Carolina's primary is. Georgia, May 24th. South Carolina, June 14th. I mean, we're talking about 3 weeks from now we can vote. For some of these people, it's 3 months from now they can vote. But nevertheless, Dr. Merrill Matthews wrote this piece about could this idea of a red wave election become a red tsunami? Help us out.
And what's happening is as we've discussed, Joe Biden's just not great performance, let's say. It's increasingly apparent that you've got the first midterm election after a president's elected, that typically is going to go to the other party. So the political analysts sort of know that's generally going to be the case. But if the president's doing a poor job, they see that as becoming even a bigger chance. And so Larry Sabato's group is thinking that, well, we probably won't have as many new people come in as we did in 1994 when Republicans took over the House and Senate, or in 2010 when Republicans came back and took over the House in Barack Obama's time. But because it's a very narrow margin, Republicans are only about 5 or 6 seats down in the House right now. But they're looking at a number. They're thinking maybe 35 Republican gains in there, which would give them the largest majority they've had since the Great Depression. And that's sort of Sabato's group saying, wow, we're thinking this is possible. And that's what they're talking about is red wave. I'm suggesting it might be a red tsunami, because the two red waves that they were looking at in 1994, when Bill Clinton lost the House and Senate to Republicans, and in 2010, you had Bill Clinton, who had in 1993 and 94 had pushed the Clinton Care health care plan. That was a disaster in what they were trying to do. He also raised taxes significantly during that time period, and there were people who were just wanting to push back on that. In 2009, we had the passage of, well, actually 2010, they passed Obamacare, and then that had 21 new taxes in it. So that's part of what was happening with the red wave then. But I would argue Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were sort of top of the game politicians. They had people who loved them. They were good at what they did. Yeah. They looked like they were in control. And I would argue that Joe Biden was not elected because of who he was, but because of who he wasn't. And so you've got these efforts to try to move this mass legislation, plus you have a president who is just not as popular as those two people were, which is why I think you may ultimately have a red tsunami out there, just a massive new group of Republicans coming in the House and Senate and in down ballots all the way across the country.
What about gerrymandering? I wrote about that the other day, and it hasn't necessarily been as helpful to Republicans as in the past, but it's still, you have, let's take the state of Texas, where we're broadcasting from right now, 2 new congressional seats, both of which I think you could say reasonably would be Republicans. So when you start changing some of the congressional seats, I think that also has the potential, don't you think, of also contributing to a red tsunami?
Most of the gerrymandering news has been on red states and not blue states. Illinois has been doing some gerrymandering itself and has been making sure that they're getting some Republicans out and some Democrats in. But the general assessment is that Democrats went out complaining about gerrymandering before it ever started. And now they're coming up and you're saying, it looks like it's actually pretty balanced. Yeah, you've got probably some new Republican seats, but there's a lot of places where they're getting some Democratic seats. And there's some Republicans in Texas who are upset because they feel like they were getting moved out by the gerrymandering and maybe giving Democrats a stronger chance. So it's an interesting time right now, but it looks like the gerrymandering is going to be, at least from what I can tell, the news accounts, generally balanced. And we'll go into elections with see what changes that has.
Well, again, first of all, a lot of this takes place, Jeremy, during the primary season. You get good candidates, then whether it's on the Republican side or Democratic side, then they have a better chance of winning in the general election. And there's fairly significant number of safe seats. But what's your thoughts about Dr. Romero Matthews' idea of a red tsunami?
Look, if it's a red tsunami, a red wave, a red trickle, I don't really care. I mean, it could be a couple drips over the edge, and I'll be just fine with that. Because it's going to stymie the crazy that's coming out of both sides of the Congress, right? And just remember what the crazy here is we're talking about, that we're talking about ending the filibuster when mere moments ago, it seems, Chuck Schumer was lambasting Mitch McConnell for the thought of trying to end the filibuster at any time, or having to worry about legislation about packing the courts there. The Equality Act, which is passed twice, the House of Representatives right now, thankfully is dying in the Senate. There needs to be a massive check on this administration and their frightening policy goals that, thankfully, because of 2 unlikely sources, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, have failed. Now, look, I want to remind everybody, if you're stopping your policy agenda because of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and it's too liberal for them, you may need to check your party again. I mean, it's gotten that bad. So my hope would be, look, I think you're probably right, buddy, that this is going to be a pretty sizable shift. My fear is that the election is still too far away.
Yes.
And there's a lot of time
for
the left.
A lot of things can happen.
Well, or at least to cover over or paper over the bad things that have happened in the last year. And although, I mean, see our earlier conversation about, this is bad. How can we make it worse, right? It seems like there's always this effort to go worse about it all.
And the difference, I would say, there is Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were good at coming back from getting knocked down if they made a mistake. Joe Biden has not been. So with this particular president, I would expect to see more issues coming up rather than fewer issues or being able to come back from it.
Let's add this to that discussion, too, because it's not just the president. It's the individuals running for their seats. Now, he's the titular head, so he's got to come in. But the AOCs of the world, they have not abandoned their efforts here, right?
No.
And it seems that the official position of the political party is all holds barred. Like, let's go as hard as we can to the left on every issue. CRT is going to be a front and center thing, of course, as it is. They're going to have preferred pronouns. I mean, all these things that are wildly unpopular amongst the base. Don't forget that poll that just came out over the weekend that something like half the Democratic Party would put you and I in jail for daring to consider that we shouldn't have a mandate for the COVID shot, right? I mean, that kind of level of crazy is that party. And so we can argue, and I think we may have different opinions, all of us in this room, about that issue. But we agree that you shouldn't have it enforced at the point of a gun. I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry, I'm close on time.
No, I think that's a good point. Come back from the break, though. I do want to talk just for a second about the Senate, because that gets into some of the judges and those kinds of things. And Kyrsten Sinema said, well, I'm not going for the filibuster. Mark Kelly said, I guess I'm going to have to go along with that. And he's running for re-election. We'll like to get your thoughts right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Lots of controversial ideas are being proposed right now, and I know you probably wonder how to respond to them. Eliminate the Electoral College, regulate campaign speech, and end the filibuster are just a few. The best way to respond to many of these proposals is to remind Americans that our country is a republic, not a democracy. The framers recognized that the country would be quite diverse. They wanted to create a government that would allow different viewpoints to get a hearing. They didn't want the president merely to be elected by the larger populations in the cities like Boston and New York. That is why we have an electoral college. States with smaller populations feared that states with large populations would always elect their candidate. The electoral college forces candidates to campaign in the entire country, not just in population areas. That also explains why we have the House of Representatives elected by voters every 2 years. But regardless of its size, each state gets 2 U.S. senators who are selected by state legislatures every 6 years, but now are also elected by the popular vote. We have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution to protect Americans, especially minorities, from a democracy where the majority could take away the fundamental rights from a minority. We enjoy freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to bear arms, and freedom from unlawful search and seizure. Even the idea of a filibuster in the U.S. Senate was implemented so that the majority would be forced to hear the arguments from the minority before passing important legislation. The filibuster may have been abused, but the concept once again illustrates our constitutional order. Sadly, many of these controversial ideas are being proposed by politicians who went to law school and should know better. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Third article today has to do with whether or not there's a red wave or red tsunami coming, or as Jeremy said, maybe even a red trickle. He'll take that as well. And I do want to move on in just a few minutes to the issue of Obamacare, health care, health mandates, vaccine mandates, all the rest. But I did mention just before I went to the break that for our listeners in Arizona, they recognize, well, we have 2 senators, Kyrsten Sinema, who made it very clear that she did not support the filibuster, removing the filibuster. Mark Kelly, who was hiding in the tall grass, but eventually said, no, I guess I have to vote for removing the filibuster, vote with Chuck Schumer. Now, it does seem to me, and I'll come to you first, Jeremy, that some people have said that Kyrsten Sinema is a very talented politician, and if she understands that in a state that has elected Barry Goldwater and John McCain and all sorts of other individuals, that voting against the filibuster and wanting to remove it is political suicide, her colleague in the Senate just basically went on record of saying, I want to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah, look, when your opponents, or at least when those who seem to want to hang themselves, the goal is not to withdraw the rope, it is to hand them more. And it seems to be that is exactly what is going on with Senator Kelly here. I mean, Kristen Sinema is a very talented politician. She knows where her electorate is. She knows exactly how to play that world. And if she has made the determination that this is not politically palatable for her, I think it would be wise for him to consider that. The question mark is what arm had been twisted in the back room to get that type of a position to be taken by him.
And I think there's other things going on. Senator Bernie Sanders had suggested he wants to see Kirsten Sinema primaried by someone who's going to be further to the left. He may have very well mentioned that to Mark Kelly. Because Mark is running, if you're going to do that, we're going to throw our weight behind somebody who's going to be further to the left than you are, which I think that person would probably lose. Mark Kelly won. He had his wife. There was a sympathetic figure because she had been shot. She'd been a congresswoman there from Arizona, and Mark's an astronaut. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about him. Not his voting record, but
yes,
there's
but
ways
him personally, sure.
And so my guess is he may end up getting primaried on that, and I'd like to see somebody primary Kirsten. I think she's going to think she'd pull out from that very well.
Also, we have a lot of listeners in Georgia, and of course, you also have a situation there. And if you look through I think it's 33 Senate elections, there are some pretty safe Republicans, pretty safe Democrats. But if you look at some of the toss-ups, and again, it's too early, we understand that, but people that look into a crystal ball like Larry Sabato are saying we've got a good number of toss-up senatorial elections. Again, as you said just a minute ago, Dr. Merrill Matthews, when you look at the House, you only need a few in the House to turn it red. You only need
one.
Yeah, really one or two.
And Manchin could do that if Schumer keeps giving him a hard time.
Yeah, just would Joe Manchin become a Republican, turn it right there? I mean, no, it won't happen. Although I do remember times when we had Republicans all of a sudden slap their forehead and become a Democrat, a senator from Vermont, for example. But it doesn't take much. And back to the comment that you made a minute ago, Jeremy, when we look at the House, if you have a Republican House, you're not going to get the Equality Act. The value of having a Republican Senate, whether you like Republicans or not, is some of these crazy nominees that have been put forward, most of whom have not found positions there, former Marxists and all sorts of other individuals. They have to go through the advice and consent of the United States Senate, and that would make things a little better in terms of the federal judiciary and some of these appointments in the executive branch, wouldn't it?
Yeah, look, we've been pretty lucky to have one of the best things one of my favorite words in all of Washington politics in the last couple of years, despite having the Democrats, or the last year, the left has the House, the Senate, and the White House. They have 2/3 of the branches of government in their control, right? And that this is very rare that this has occurred, but we have thankfully been blessed by the presence of gridlock.
Yes,
for the last year. And that has truly been a salvation to our country. I mean, there's been if that had not been the case and they had really made hay on these things, there's some really dastardly things that could have occurred. My goal is for November to become a bigger form of gridlock there, right? When a different party controls 1/3 of the branches of government than the White House, then there's going to be at least the greater potential for more gridlock to occur. Because when Washington's not doing stuff, more of my freedoms are allowed to stand. And that's what I want to have happen right now. So I love me some gridlock whenever it can occur. I'm not truly confident that the Congress going back in the hands of the Republicans
yes, I know.
will really be truly helpful to us. In other words, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to see get off the books. But at least more damage won't be readily able to happen at any moment. Because, really, at any moment in the last year, we could have had the Equality Act passed, boom, signed into law. At any moment in the past 2 weeks, we could have had the filibuster gone.
Yes.
Within the last 3 months, we could have had billions and billions of dollars more in the kind of the social Build Back Better Act part of things. Boom, in place. We could at any moment right now have the Green New Deal for America, boom, passed into law and signed. There's really very little ways of stopping that if the left gets their act together and decides they're going to push it all. I want that to be at least a slow process rather than a boom done. And we don't really have that chance unless the houses of Congress are occupied differently.
And, to Jeremy's point, when Republicans controlled the House, Senate, and White House during George W. Bush's time, they were not spendthrifts. They spent a lot of money. And so to Jeremy's point, I would argue that Republicans end up spending nearly as much as Democrats. They just claim to feel bad about it. But you don't see a lot of changes there. Yeah. And you had the situation of Nancy Pelosi running in 2006 election to regain control of the House. Nancy Pelosi, as the minority leader in the House of Representatives, was campaigning on, you need to elect Democrats so that we can get spending under control.
And she was able to say that without a plastic smile on her face somehow. No, we don't have to go back to ancient political history for this lesson either. We just go back to 2020 and May, June of 2020 when we had all that emergency legislation passed on COVID stuff. Now, you can argue about whether or not that was necessary. I'm not sure that it was, or certainly that price tag. But what it definitely did is to say, well, there's not a dime's worth of difference now between the parties that are willing to send several more zeros on the back end of a piece of legislation and not even think about where the money's going to come from. I mean, so there really is not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties in that point.
And now we're getting the various administrations that are looking at and said, looks like there was actually some fraud in some of that money that we handed out.
This would be my shocked face about that.
Your shocked face. And you've written articles and even a chapter in a book about that, so that is the case. Again, we shouldn't have been surprised. I remember even in the 2016 election, we had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and I said, have you noticed that either of these candidates or either of their platforms have called for even addressing the issue of the national debt? And the answer to that was no. And it has been the rare politician on either side to ever talk about that. The only time they talk about it is when the other party's in power, and then they do talk about that. Nancy Pelosi talking about when the Republicans are power. Of course, Republicans talking about when Democrats are power. But the bottom line is this national debt goes up every single year. Doesn't matter whether you have a Republican presidency or a Democratic presidency, whether you have Republicans control the House and the Senate or Democrats control it.
You said another issue that's of very big importance, and that is the issue of judges, because there's going to be, we saw this week, a Fifth Circuit judge was appointed by President Obama, decided to resign. That's a new opening there. Now, thankfully, that won't disturb the balance of power in that circuit too much right now. But there are other circuits that are pretty, on the balance of things, that you go a couple different directions, and it's a real problem on those courts. With a Republican court, or a Republican Senate anyway, theoretically, they will have to they'll have to tack to the center for the judges that they would want to nominate. That becomes even more important when you consider all the rumors flying around right now about Justice Breyer retiring.
There you go.
And we saw what kind of fights those occur on. So that one may not be a bad replacement, at least not major damage, because it's just a one-for-one exchange. But if we can actually manage to get someone to come that's a little bit closer to the center and at least asks shorter questions than Justice Breyer tends to ask on the bench, then maybe that would be a little bit of a win for the country.
I did hear somebody quip this week that said if Mitch McConnell becomes the majority leader again, he will hold that seat open for however many years he has to before nominating, allowing the vote to go forward.
Because he kept us from having Merrick Garland, that was supposed to be a moderate that we found out wasn't. But let's take a break. When we come back, one of the other articles, the annual Obamacare's doing great ruse. We haven't talked about health care in quite a while, but I thought it would be good to get into that because I was seeing it the other day, and it gets us into all sorts of other issues: health care delivery, vaccine mandates, and a number of other issues. And if we have time, we'll also get into energy. Two areas of expertise for Dr. Merrill Matthews are, of course, health care and energy, and you can go to ipi.org to find that. And, of course, since we'll be talking about vaccine mandate, of course, you will want to see some material at firstliberty.org. Also, firstlibertylive.com if you want to know some things that we were talking about in terms of Coach Kennedy. All of those are on the website. You can check those out, and we'll look at these last two articles in the last half hour right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to talk about health issues, the issue of Obamacare. We're going to talk about vaccine mandates, and that may just take the rest of their time, and that is our fourth article. It is written by Dr. Merrill Matthews. Of course, Jeremy Dice with us as well. And Dr. Matthews, I love how you put this. It's time once again for multiple news stories about how great the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act is, and yet you go back, and I love what you do, all the people that were talking about what would happen and then the reality of what didn't happen. Help us out with that.
Well, yes. Every year about this time, we get the new numbers of how many people have signed up for the exchanges. The news reported about a week ago, 14.1 million. Mm-hmm. They do this sort of breathlessly, like this is the biggest number ever. And one of the points I try to make is how underwhelming that is, because Barack Obama and Democrats thought people were going to so enjoy the Obamacare exchanges. I even heard some of the economists on the liberal side saying, I think people are going to want to leave their employer-based health insurance so they can go and get in the exchange and get really good coverage that's going to be very affordable, and they'll have lots of choices among health insurance plans. And of course, immediately you had plans pulling out. That stabilized some now. But what's happened is the government has, both in the legislation itself, if the premiums go up, those who are getting subsidies get more subsidy to help offset the cost of that. Plus, in the legislation, both from President Trump and Joe Biden, they have put more money in there to make the subsidies even bigger and to cover people with higher incomes, mm-hmm. so that you can make it much more affordable for people to get in. And then they're surprised that more people get in. Plus, of course, you have a lot of people who are out of work. That's been part of the problem. If you're out of work, you're not wanting to go back to work. You're concerned about going back to work because of the virus or something, and you want to go into this, you can go in there. If you don't have much income, you can have the taxpayer cover most of it. But what happens is over the year, a lot of these 14.1 million will drop out as they go get employer coverage somewhere. They become 65 and get on Medicare. They are low income. Maybe they end up going into Medicaid or something of that nature. So the number at the end of the year is usually much smaller than the number at the beginning of the year, but we never hear about that number.
Well, again, let's talk about quantity and quality. You talked about quantity, and that is 14.2 million, which is not a lot out of 300 million plus people. But quality is the other part. And I don't mean this negative against the individuals, but there's always been a concern about what's called the death spiral.
Right.
That the people that leave tend to be those that are the healthiest. You end up with the people that have some of the most chronic issues, some of the people that are the poorest and the oldest. And so in some respects, that wasn't supposed to happen either, was it?
No, and all of that did happen. And as a result, the premium started going up significantly. And so many people, and our listeners will remember this, right after it got started, a number of health insurance plans said we're going to cancel the coverage that we have because it's not Obamacare qualified, and people started losing their health insurance, unlike President Obama's promise that if you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. That became PolitiFact's lie of the year for 2013.
Yes.
And so you had people losing their health insurance, and many people looked for something else. What the insurers did was, in order to try to keep the premiums down because the mounting pressure was there, they started raising deductibles. They started adjusting what they were going to pay for and so forth. So we went from deductibles that my wife had a policy that was $2,500 deductible. It was high, and it was a Blue Cross policy. It was not cheap, but we sort of felt like we can live with this. Well, that got canceled right off the bat. And Blue Cross went to another one, which so her deductible went up by 50%. And it's not deductible. The premiums went up by 50%. The deductible doubled. And within a year, Blue Cross came out and said, well, we had 350,000 people in this. We're losing $420 million. Now, this is with higher deductibles and more premiums, and they lost hundreds of millions of dollars. So we're canceling this, and you'll have to figure something else out. And so my wife finally went into one of the MediShare programs because that was the only thing that was affordable out there.
I do want to get to vaccine mandates. raised with one other question. The argument which was made by Barack Obama and even more recently by Joe Biden, because part of the Biden's America Rescue Plan put money in there, was that we would eventually no longer have a problem with uninsured Americans.
Right.
How'd that work out?
They thought they were going to have universal coverage, and the number is lower now, but that's almost entirely due to the Obamacare's expansion of Medicaid. So if the issue was all you want to do is really going to expand Medicaid for low-income health insurance for the poor, funded by the federal and state governments, then you could have done that, and you could have saved an awful lot of people who had insurance from having to go through all these other problems. But that's where most of the increase in coverage came from, is the expansion of Medicaid, and there's still a handful of states that have not accepted the Medicaid expansion. They're getting all kinds of pressure, but gradually those states have been moving in. Texas has not. It's getting pressure too. I don't think Governor Abbott will do it, but that's been one of the trends that have happened here.
Well, again, some of the health care issues, and of course I mentioned the Biden American Rescue Plan, which expanded that. But let's get into vaccine mandates, because as you were talking about just a minute ago, Jeremy, well, there was a time not so long ago when incoming president, at this time last year, President Biden said, we're not going to mandate vaccines, and now we have mandated them, and they've led to the various lawsuits that you've had to file.
Yeah, and to be clear and answer your question, I'm against them. I think most everybody that is, reasonable is against them. And that's not because we are pro-virus. That certainly is the opposite of what we mean to communicate. And again, I think most everybody is. My wife has had COVID. I've recently just gotten over it myself. I've made my decisions based upon my actuarials and risk analyses that I should or should not get the mandate. It's not up to you. It's up to me. And I don't really want to tell you whether or not I chose to get the shot or not. It's none of your business. And that is the same way I feel about all of Washington, D.C., or frankly, any person of power that says that I must. And the mandates that have come out have come in multiple directions, and they're kind of the rationale for them is that this is an emergency and we've got to address this emergency. This is what we were told on September 9th of 2021. By November 5th, 2 months later, we're finally getting this emergency legislation, or not even legislation, administrative rules that are out there. And so the court, I think 3 weeks ago, took a real harsh stance against us to say, you're going to call that an emergency? Justice Barrett in the argument even said, hey, what's the off-ramp? If this is an emergency, emergencies come to an end at some point. Where's the off-ramp? What do you guys... And they had no answer for that. There is none. And we keep on going. Just a few minutes ago, Judge Brown in the Southern District here in Texas issued an injunction against the federal worker mandate. So now if you're keeping track at home, that means that the OSHA mandate is enjoined. At least part of the military mandate is enjoined, and largely just kind of rhetorically it's enjoined for the rest of them. It was the injunction for 35 Navy SEALs that we got, but that's going to apply more broadly because the Navy's going to be loath to act on that. The federal worker mandate is now enjoined as well. The federal contractor has been enjoined as well. The only one that is left standing is, and is really kind of standing on some tottering legs, is the Medicaid, Medicare mandate. And that one is the hospitals and the nursing homes and things like that. That, again, we can make some argument as to why that would be prudentially right. I'm still against the mandate for a lot of good reasons on these things, and I can just point to the other 4 ones that have been enjoined for all the right reasons, that it's not the job of the federal government to engage in central planning and apply a one-size-fits-all solution to these things, especially in a time when we've seen in the last couple of weeks where it doesn't matter what your shot status is. You're probably going to get Omicron. And those who have avoided it, good for you. It's a great thing to avoid. This is why I'm still coughing myself a little bit right now. But the one size fits all solution has never been how we've approached this in our government. And I wrote this on Fox minutes after the OSHA decision, that this ought to put to an end the age of the autocrat in government. That's what we've been putting. Whether your name is Bill de Blasio, Andrew Cuomo, or Joe Biden, we have for far too long in this country been putting up with autocrats who've arrogated power unto themselves that they do not possess, that Congress has not articulated that they may do. And they've just simply been doing it and saying, come get me. Well, First Liberty has been coming to get them quite often in the last 2 years. And frankly, I'm a little sick of it. I'd like to be able to go on and do other things right now. And I keep having to kind of push back these autocrats out of my way because we've got other things that we want to be doing here, and they won't allow us to get to those things. So I'm against the mandates. I hope they stay dead. They need to stay dead. If you want to go get the shot, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Go ahead and go do it. It doesn't bother me. You want to wear a mask or, a plastic bubble over your head? Fine. Wear a goldfish bottle over your head. I don't care. But don't go out there and say that freedom demands that everybody in the universe line up to get a sufficient amount of mRNA put into their shoulder.
Let's take a break because, again, we have one of those mandatory breaks. But when we come back, I'd like to get your thoughts about what this means in the future, because the other day we posted the article about Starbucks, not exactly a conservative outfit, saying we're not going to require a mandate. And so what does this mean? Will we still have various companies, and will airlines and others feel that they need to do so? I want to kind of get a sense of what you think the future might look like. And I'd love to get your thoughts, too. If you'd like to join the conversation this last segment, give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Come back and maybe cover one or two more stories, but I'd love to get your thoughts, and we'll be right back.
The COVID-19 vaccine was approved for children 5 and older on an emergency basis at the end of October. Immediately, talk of mandates began. Several experts on an FDA advisory panel warned against mandating the shot for kids, but some leaders have already succumbed to what National Review's Rich Lowry calls the irresistible urge of officialdom in blue areas toward pandemic coercion. Once the FDA fully approves the vaccine for children, mandates in California, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. will take effect, and others are in the works. This is crazy. First, there's no evidence the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines prevent infection and transmission of the Omicron variant, which represents over 95% of cases. In a piece for the Wall Street Journal, Nobel Prize winner for physiology, Dr. Luc Montagnier, cites research from Denmark and Canada showing that vaccinated people have higher rates of Omicron infection than unvaccinated people. Secondly, COVID is mild in children. The Omicron variant is even more so. Anecdotally, I tested positive after having all my kids and grandkids over for Christmas. Merry Christmas. I gave it to a few of them. The 2 little ones who tested positive had low fevers and mild coughs for a day or so. Rich Lowry points out COVID vaccinations aren't going to eliminate COVID the way, say, Jonas Salk's miraculous innovation eliminated polio. In fact, he writes, it's not even clear that childhood vaccinations will do much to dent the spread. Unvaccinated kids are unlikely to get seriously ill from COVID, but the vaccine poses a risk to boys, even boys aged 5 to 11, of a heart condition called myocarditis. In Los Angeles, the school board attempted to mandate that students 12 and older be vaccinated or relegated to remote learning, causing what Mr. Lowry calls an almost guaranteed harm, kneecapping their education. Parents can weigh these considerations and decide whether getting their teens and now their little kids vaccinated is worth the risk. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let me just mention that sometimes we play at this particular time, for those of you listening on the computer, commentary by Penna Dexter. She's not with us this Friday, probably will be with us next Friday, but it's entitled Kids Vaccine Mandates. And since we were talking with Jeremy about that, let me just mention that she talks about the fact that this vaccine was approved for children 5 and older on an emergency basis back at the end of October, but then all sorts of mandates mandates began to come out there. The FDA Advisory Board really warned against mandating the shot for kids, but guess what? Some others stepped in there and actually decided to call for a mandate of these vaccines. There's really no evidence, and again, we'll go around the round table because I know Dr. Merrill Matthews has been looking at this as well, that Pfizer and Moderna prevent infection and transmission, at least of this variant. But now vaccinating these kids and having them have to have a vaccine passport. Love to get your thoughts about this, Jeremy.
I mean, again, you can't have that to go to vote. That would be a denial of some civil right. But there was a story out of New York City this week with a kid who I think was under 10 or something. He was arrested. He was in handcuffs being marched out of the New York City Museum of Natural History in handcuffs because he didn't have a COVID-19 shot passport thing. This is the United States of America, and we've got a kid in handcuffs because he didn't have sufficient mRNA, or at least proof of mRNA in his shoulder blade. This is, wake up. I mean, come on. What are we doing on these things? And look, before I can hear you. I feel you right now. I feel you going, but this disease is really bad. No, I get it. It does cause problems. I'm not denying the status of a virus. It exists. I know it exists from firsthand experience, but it's not something that we are not guaranteed a risk-free life this side of eternity. It just is not something we're guaranteed for. And so we used to be dedicated in this country to something called individual freedom and personal responsibility. Let us please return to that status in life of being free to make some choices and exercise our personal responsibility to protect others as well.
And one of the problems that comes with this is if you expand the mandates now when you have a really what has been a serious crisis with this, it makes it a little easier when the next one comes around. Let's say the seasonal flu, and we've got maybe a worse strain than we've had before. Then now you've got to go out and get your flu vaccination because we've got a worse strain coming, and it just sort of opens the door to be able to do one more thing and one more thing to the point where you say we're just going to do it. We're going to require everybody to get every vaccine that we make.
I just want us to stop and pause for a minute to remember that the country whom we fought a revolution to get away from is right now more free than we are on this. Think about that. I mean,
I know. We talked about that the other day.
We're done.
Look at what Boris Johnson said the other day. Yeah, I mean, it was just amazing.
Yeah, and the greatest country, supposedly, of freedom in the universe is still engaging in questions about lockdowns and how long and mandates. And we've got 5 different pieces of litigation that are out there right now determining whether or not the president of the free world is allowed to mandate something on his people. Think about it.
Well, there's another question that Penna Dexter raises, and it's a quote from Rich Lowry. There is a situation where you have vaccines, and he mentions Jonas Salk, the polio vaccine. My dad used to work for Pfizer, and I've mentioned that many times before. And I remember when we had the polio vaccine, we put them on sugar cubes and other things, and actually, once you get that vaccination, you will not get polio. I have people on my staff that actually do have polio from the 1950s, for example. But this is not the same. We are seeing right now that those people that are fully vaxxed, fully boosted, still get the disease. So there's a question, I think, Dr. Merrill Matthews, of how much further down the road are we going to go with this?
And it's we don't know. The coronavirus, like other types of influenza types of virus, contagious upper respiratory viruses can morph, and the vaccines that we have, just like with flu, sometimes work better, sometimes don't work as well. It works better with some people and not with other people, and I suspect that's what we were seeing here. And there have been past coronavirus small epidemics, let's say, where they didn't have nearly as many people affected or deaths, and so people were the first COVID virus that came out in 2001 or 2002, the MERS virus in 2012. They didn't have nearly the impact. So a person could have started out in this saying, this may not be that bad. It has become very bad in how many people it's affected and how contagious it's been. But it may be that mRNA becomes such a standard, a gold standard, that we're able to get something like that, and we're going to be able to get full protection from now on. But with coronaviruses, that's typically not the case.
Yes, and again, that's because we have a flu every year. We have the cold every year.
And why haven't we spent in 2 years' time now talking about what do we do once you get it? right?
Yeah.
Because it's inevitable.
Good point.
People are going to get it, whether or not a lot of people or little people. We've spent so much time discussed about, and frankly, fixated upon prevention. And all of us want to prevent it. We don't want to have it. Nobody should want to have this thing unless they're really screwy in the brain. But what do we do when you get it? I'm telling you, your doctor doesn't know how to treat it when you get it. They're going to throw symptom control stuff at it, and that's great. And there are things like the monoclonal antibodies that are out there. But I know in our case, it was a 3-week wait. But if you could maybe get it. And they weren't even taking referrals right now here and this is Texas that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So those are not in heavy supply. There are at least 3 different FDA approved post infection treatments available for you, pills that you can take. Not widely available on the market at all.
Not yet.
Why are we not talking about any of those things? We've turned it all into this political zero-sum game that is resulting in people dying. That is a moral tragedy, and someone I would hope should go to jail for it. I mean, it's that level of horrible.
Well, and you get people going and getting horse dewormer because they'd heard that ivermectin works well. And I mean, it's just the craziest thing. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, maybe if nothing else, people can go to your website, ipi.org, and find a couple of these articles that you've written over the years on some of the issues of healthcare. We didn't get to, but I'll just mention the energy axis of evil. That is where we get our energy. You know, at least 3 of those places where energy comes from, they're not exactly our best friends, are they?
That's
not something to pay attention to as well.
Yes. And that's happening, and we're going to be talking about it on February 1st, I think, here.
Yes.
So,
Right.
the energy axis of evil, where you have Russia, you have China, you have Iran, and they are working together to be able to, they're buying Iranian oil or Russian oil, they're shipping it through to North Korea and doing other things. So the efforts to try to control that has just simply not worked, and the sanctions against Iran have not sort of really sanctioned them. They're within the top 10 oil-producing countries in the world.
You're going to have quite a roundtable discussion on that, so we'll give that as a promo for what we'll be talking about in terms of energy. And again, if you want information about everything from healthcare to finances and taxation, energy, all those things, and much, much more, ipi.org. And Jeremy, just real quickly, what can we find at First Liberty? Because I think I really want to start mobilizing people to pray for the Coach Kennedy case, the case, of course, with the Maine school choice case, and also, of course, some of these vaccine mandates cases. So they can find that at the website, can't they?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to be very focused on Coach Kennedy, and for hope a lot of good reasons. Coach Kennedy, look, the decision in the Ninth Circuit really did some damage to the facts, and it not only just simply remixed them, and I'm trying to avoid the word lie. It just didn't tell the full truth on these things. Coach Kennedy has done everything he possibly could to avoid this litigation. We've tried to get every off-ramp we could to avoid this litigation. Just let him go by himself at the yard line in 15 seconds. We're talking 15 seconds in silent prayer. And they steadfastly refuse to do that, even while acknowledging that might be possible. It's been crazy. Judge Smith even said that, I don't have time to go into that. Go to firstliberty.org. If you want to know more about Coach Kennedy, CoachKennedyFacts.com. We'll get you directly there as well.
And again, that link's also at firstliberty.org, and you can see case summary and all the rest. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. 5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.